In 1978, the McClary family vanished from their cabin deep in the woods of northern Alabama. No bodies, no blood, just a dinner table set for three, and a note that read, "We heard something upstairs." For 47 years, locals said the place was cursed, that if you stayed there overnight you could still hear footsteps in the attic. But what nobody knew was that the attic wasn't what it seemed. In 2025, a construction crew uncovered something hidden above the rafters, a space that shouldn't have existed, and what they found inside changed everything. Alabama, October 1978. The rain had started before sunset, a soft drumming that grew heavier as night fell across the dense pine forests outside Huntsville. On County Road 17, where the asphalt gave way to gravel and then to packed dirt, a single cabin sat at the edge of a slope, overlooking a narrow creek. It belonged to David and Caroline McClary, a young couple in their 30s with a 6-year-old son named Evan. They'd bought the cabin that spring, a fixer-upper they called it, planning to spend weekends away from town. Caroline had written to her sister that week about how peaceful it felt, how she was finally sleeping through the night for the first time in years. By 9 p.m., neighbors down the hill reported hearing distant thunder and something else. 3 sharp metallic sounds that might have been hammering or something breaking. No one went to check. When the sheriff arrived the next morning, after Caroline's sister failed to reach them by phone, he found the cabin door slightly open. The interior was untouched except for a few unsettling details. A half-eaten meal on the kitchen table, a kerosene lamp still burning, a pair of muddy footprints near the stairs, and the note, written hastily on the back of a grocery list. "We heard something upstairs. Checking it out. D." The attic hatch was open when they arrived, the pull chain swaying gently, as if disturbed only moments before. But the attic itself was empty. The McClarys were never seen again. For weeks, search teams scoured the surrounding woods. Helicopters, hounds, volunteers, nothing. Theories circulated fast. A family abduction, a bear attack, a crime of passion. But there was no sign of struggle, and no evidence of anyone else having entered or left the property. By winter, the investigation grew cold. The sheriff retired 3 years later. The case box, labeled McClary, 1978, sat untouched in county storage for decades, gathering dust, and the cabin was left to rot. In the years that followed, it became local folklore. The vanishing cabin. Teenagers dared each other to spend the night there. Hunters claimed to hear crying near the creek. Some said they'd seen a lantern glow moving through the trees. Most people didn't believe it, but a few, the old-timers who remembered that autumn, said they'd always felt something off about the place, like the woods themselves had been keeping a secret. They were right. 47 years later, in the spring of 2025, a construction crew clearing the property for redevelopment discovered the cabin still standing, though nearly swallowed by vines. Their job was simple: demolish what was left, salvage what they could. But when one of the workers, a man named Harvey Lott, climbed into the attic to pull insulation, his hammer hit something hollow. He stopped, tapped again. A different sound, deeper, muffled, like wood covering a cavity. When he pried the panel loose, what spilled out wasn't dust or insulation. It was a faded bundle of photographs bound by a rotted leather strap, and beneath them, a small wooden box with a tarnished brass clasp. The box was locked, but etched into the top, barely legible beneath the grime, was a single word: E-V-A-N. Harvey's crew called the county sheriff, who in turn contacted the cold case unit in Huntsville. Within hours, the site was sealed. Detective Lena Ward, a former behavioral profiler from Birmingham, was assigned to the rediscovery. Standing beneath the low beams of that attic, Ward said later that she felt the air go still, as if the house itself were waiting. Inside the box, they found 3 items: a small metal toy car, rusted but intact; A Polaroid photograph showing the cabin's staircase, taken from above, and a strip of magnetic tape labeled June 3rd, 1978, attic. When they played the tape, a man's voice came through. Faint, shaking, almost inaudible beneath the hiss of static. "It's not empty up here." The road to Hollow Creek was narrower than Detective Lena Ward remembered from her childhood drives through northern Alabama. The trees leaned closer now, their branches heavy with early spring leaves that brushed against her windshield like cautious fingers. The world beyond the glass was a wash of muted greens and golds, but inside the car, everything felt colder, tight, held in the tension of what she was about to see again. The GPS stuttered, briefly losing signal as she turned onto County Road 17. The cracked pavement gave way to gravel, and the familiar crunch beneath her tires filled the silence. Somewhere beyond the next bend, behind the screen of pines, stood the cabin that had haunted local rumor for nearly half a century. It wasn't Lena's first cold case, but something about this one felt heavier, personal in a way she couldn't quite define. Maybe it was because she'd grown up only 30 miles from here, listening to her grandmother whisper the story of the vanishing McClarys. Maybe it was because she'd read the original incident report last night, and the handwriting on that final note, "We heard something upstairs," looked too human, too immediate to belong to ghosts. The road curved, and suddenly the cabin appeared, half hidden by overgrowth. Its roof sagged under the weight of years. The windows were filmed with grime, the porch boards warped and split. A sheriff's cruiser and 2 unmarked sedans were already parked near the tree line. She pulled in beside them, the engine ticking as it cooled. When she stepped out, the air hit her like a wet cloth, thick with the smell of pine resin, old wood, and damp earth. Voices carried softly from the porch. Sheriff Don Avery, tall and broad-shouldered even in his 50s, looked up as she approached. He'd been on the force for 27 years. The kind of man who'd seen too much and said too little. "Detective Ward," he greeted, tipping his hat slightly. "Didn't think Huntsville would send one of their big guns for a relic like this." "It's not just a relic anymore," she replied, glancing toward the gabled roof. "You said the crew found something in the attic?" He nodded, motioning her to follow. "You'll want to see this yourself." They stepped inside. The air was cool and still, the kind of silence that felt contained, like sound itself didn't want to linger. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the boarded windows, painting the dust in thin, trembling beams. The kitchen was almost untouched since the photographs from 1978, still the same checkered linoleum, though curled at the edges. Still the same cast-iron stove in the corner. On the table, someone had placed a few recovered items inside plastic evidence sleeves. The toy car, the Polaroid, the magnetic tape. Each one seemed ordinary on its own. Together they pulsed with unease. Lena picked up the Polaroid, holding it under the dim light. The picture showed the staircase from above, leading down into darkness. Something white was just visible at the bottom step, blurred, indistinct. Maybe motion, maybe reflection. "Where's the tape now?" she asked. Avery gestured toward a portable player on the counter. "We made a copy. Haven't released it to the press yet." Lena slipped on a pair of gloves, pressed play, and the static filled the air. A raw, hissing breath from another century. Then came the faint scrape of movement, wood shifting under weight. And finally, the voice. A man, whispering close to the microphone. "It's not empty up here." The sound made the back of her neck prickle. Whoever he was, he hadn't been reading a script. There was real fear in his voice, thin and shaking like the final note of a song before silence swallows it. "When was this found?" she asked. 2 weeks ago, Avery said. "Crew called us right away. We sent forensics from Birmingham. They confirmed the box hadn't been moved since the late 70s. No signs of recent tampering. Lena turned toward the ceiling. The pull chain of the attic door hung motionless above the hallway. It swayed slightly when she passed beneath it, though there was no draft. "Mind if I go up?" she asked. Avery hesitated. "You sure? It's not exactly stable up there. I'll be careful." She pulled the chain, and the wooden ladder unfolded with a groan. The smell that came down was stronger. Dry rot, dust, something faintly metallic. She climbed slowly, the steps creaking under her weight until her head cleared the opening and she could see the space above. The attic was low and narrow, its rafters webbed with cobwebs. Afternoon light spilled in through a broken vent, illuminating the corner where the wooden box had been found. The insulation had been pulled back in clumps, exposing a section of paneling that looked newer than the rest. The grain was different, finer, smoother. Someone had replaced this portion decades ago. She crouched and ran her gloved fingers along the seam. There, a small ridge, almost invisible unless you felt for it. She pressed. The panel gave slightly, then popped loose with a dull click. Behind it was a hollow about 3 feet deep. Inside, something waited. A small metal latch, a second compartment. She felt her pulse quicken. "Sheriff," she called softly. "You might want to see this." Avery climbed halfway up the ladder, squinting into the gloom. "What is it?" "Another panel. Looks like they built a false wall behind the attic frame." He let out a low whistle. 47 years, and nobody thought to check for that. Lena's flashlight beam swept across the compartment. There was something wedged in the corner, a strip of fabric, pale blue, nearly disintegrated. She reached for it, and as it came free, she realized it was a child's pajama sleeve, patterned with faded stars. Inside the cuff, a small tag with a name still legible through the dust. Evan McClary. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The attic seemed to draw in its breath. Avery's voice was barely above a whisper. "Guess we know whose box that was." Lena nodded, her throat tight. "Get forensics up here. I don't want this touched again until they've done a full scan." As she descended the ladder, her mind churned through the implications. Why a child's clothing would be hidden inside a false wall. Why someone had sealed it away so carefully. Theories flickered and fell apart before they could form. Every answer felt wrong. Outside, the afternoon light had already begun to fade, turning the woods to shadow. The wind had picked up again, whispering through the trees like distant breath. Lena stood on the porch, watching the forest move in slow ripples. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a bird called once and went silent. She exhaled slowly, tasting the damp air. Something terrible had happened here, and whatever it was, it had been waiting a long time to be found. By the time the forensic unit arrived from Birmingham, the forest had grown darker, the late afternoon sky bruised with approaching rain. Detective Lena Ward watched from the porch as 2 vans rolled up the dirt drive, headlights cutting through the mist that hung low over the trees. The team moved with quiet precision, camera flashes strobing through the cabin's broken windows, the muffled sound of gloves snapping on, bags rustling, the whine of a portable generator warming up for the floodlights. Inside, the cabin transformed from a ruin into a scene of quiet science. Yellow evidence markers dotted the floor like fallen petals. Every inch of the attic was scanned, photographed, dusted, and sealed. Sheriff Avery leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "They're saying that wall's been untouched for decades. You think whoever hid that pajama sleeve was one of the McClarys?" Lena stood by the kitchen table, studying the Polaroids. "If it was one of them," she said, "they were hiding evidence from someone else, or from something they didn't want found." The Polaroid still unsettled her. She'd examined it 3 times since arriving, each time convinced there was something she wasn't seeing. The staircase in the photo was unmistakably this one. The same chipped banister, the same worn treads. But the image had a tilt, as though the photographer's hand was shaking. And that white blur at the bottom step. Lena zoomed in on it under her phone's light. Not light reflection, not damage. A shape. A curve like the back of a hand or shoulder, blurred mid-motion. She turned the photo over. Faded ink scrawled on the back read, June 3rd, 1978. He's not alone. Her stomach tightened. Avery, do you know if the McClarys owned a Polaroid camera? According to the old case file. Yeah. Caroline's sister mentioned it. Said Caroline was documenting the renovation that spring. Lena nodded slowly, her eyes returning to the photograph. So someone took this in the attic. But Caroline's note said they heard something upstairs. So who took the photo if they were both downstairs? The sheriff didn't answer. His gaze shifted to the ceiling, where a thin thread of dust drifted down through the beam of his flashlight. Maybe the kid. Lena frowned. Evan. He was 6. Kids that age are curious. Maybe he followed them up. Maybe he saw something he shouldn't have. Lena didn't reply. She looked again at the Polaroid, tracing the faint outline of the blur. The thought of a child witnessing something in that dark, narrow attic lodged in her chest like a splinter. A flash went off behind her as a technician descended from the attic ladder. Detective Ward, the woman said, holding out an evidence bag. You'll want to see this. Inside the clear plastic sleeve was a strip of film, developed negatives. The edges were brittle, but the images were surprisingly intact. Found these behind the false wall with the pajama sleeve, the tech said. Hidden in a small metal tin. Looks like family photos. We'll scan them minutes later in the soft light of a portable monitor. Lena and Avery watched as the images came to life one by one. The first showed the cabin in daylight, the McClary family standing on the porch. David, smiling, his arm around Caroline. Evan perched on the railing, one shoe untied, grinning wide enough to show the gap in his front teeth. The second showed the same porch. Only this time, Caroline wasn't smiling. She was standing near the doorway, looking off camera, her expression tense, her hand resting protectively on Evan's shoulder. Lena leaned closer. Can you zoom on the background? The tech enlarged the darker section behind the trees near the cabin's edge. There, half in shadow, was the faint outline of a man. Not one of the McClarys. Tall, thin, standing just beyond the tree line. The third photo made the room go quiet. It was taken inside the house. Evening light through the windows. The camera pointed toward the staircase. David stood halfway up, looking over his shoulder, eyes wide, as if startled. Behind him, near the landing, a shape was visible in the shadows. Something that looked almost human, crouched low, the suggestion of a face half lit and half turned toward the lens. Jesus, Avery murmured. The tech spoke quietly. These weren't taken by accident. The angles, the framing, whoever took them was watching something. Maybe documenting Lena's pulse quickened. Can we enhance the figure? The technician nodded, typing commands. The screen adjusted, sharpening grain by grain until the image resolved into something that made the air in the cabin thicken. The crouched figure had the proportions of a man, long limbs, head tilted unnaturally low. But there was something off. The face wasn't quite visible, but the eyes reflected light the way animal eyes do at night. 2 perfect points of silver. Lena's breath caught. That's not motion blur. No, the tech confirmed. That's reflection. The flash hit direct retina. So whoever or whatever that was, they were looking straight at the camera. Avery shifted uncomfortably. Could be someone squatting here before the McClarys moved in. Someone living up there, maybe, Lena said, though her voice was distant. Or someone who never left. She stepped away from the monitor, her mind running through the timeline. June 3rd, 1978. The same date etched on the tape. The same handwriting as the note on the kitchen table. Everything connected back to that night. The noise upstairs, the missing family, And now the photographs that seemed to show an intruder inside their home. Outside, thunder rolled low across the valley. Rain began to fall against the windows, soft at first, then harder, drumming on the roof like a heartbeat. The tech team packed up their equipment for transport, sealing each evidence bag with care. Lena stood alone for a moment near the open doorway, watching the rain turn the yard to mist. The smell of wet pine filled the air, clean and heavy. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the tree line, a flash of movement caught her eye, a flicker of pale shape against the shadows. She froze, squinting through the rain. Nothing, just the sway of branches. She told herself it was the wind, but as she turned to leave, a quiet sound echoed from above, the faint creak of wood under weight. The attic again. She looked up toward the ceiling. The pull chain was still swinging, though no one had touched it in minutes. Avery appeared beside her. "You hear that?" "Yeah," Lena said softly, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "I heard." The sound faded. The house went still again. They left the cabin just before nightfall, the sheriff locking the door behind them. The floodlights were switched off, plunging the clearing into the gray-blue of approaching dusk. As they reached the cars, Avery looked back once. The cabin's dark windows seemed to reflect their own faces, or maybe something else behind the glass. "You ever get the feeling," he said quietly, "that some houses remember what happened inside them?" Lena didn't answer. She was still staring at the attic window, where a single beam of her car's headlight caught the glass just right, long enough to show what looked like a faint handprint pressed against the inside. When she blinked, it was gone. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the Alabama woods washed clean. Mist curled above the creek that ran behind the McClary property, and the scent of rain-soaked earth drifted through the open windows of the county field office. Detective Lena Ward sat at a metal desk, headphones clamped over her ears, a laptop glowing pale in the dim light. The original magnetic tape from the McClary attic had been transferred overnight by the state audio lab. What she was hearing now was the first high-resolution digital reconstruction of a voice that hadn't been heard since 1978. Static swelled, then leveled. A faint hum, perhaps from the old recorder's motor, filled the left channel. After a moment, a man spoke. "Testing, testing. Caroline, can you hear this?" "It's working." "Okay, June 3rd, 1978, 9:41 p.m. His voice was calm, careful, the kind of tone people use when talking to themselves to steady their nerves. "We heard something upstairs. Thought it was an animal, but Caroline swears she saw the hatch move on its own." There was a pause. A faint sound, like wind, or maybe breath, brushed against the microphone. "Going to take the recorder with me." Just in case, the next few seconds were filled with the creak of footsteps on wood, a door opening, the ladder extending. The timbre of the air changed, more echo now, more resonance, the sound of an attic swallowing him whole. Then the tone shifted. A single thump, a scraping. "Hello, anyone up here?" Silence, the faint click of the tape being adjusted. "Caroline, can you hear me?" No reply. Only another scrape, closer this time. The sound of something dragging lightly across wood. Then, barely audible, another voice. A whisper. Female. "David." Lena paused the recording, rewound, turned up the gain. The word came again, soft, almost intimate. "David." It wasn't fearful. It was beckoning. The sheriff entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "How's it sounding?" Lena removed one headphone. "It's him, David McClary." He brought the recorder up there that night. Avery set 1 cup beside her and leaned against the desk. "Anything useful?" "More than useful." She hit play again. The recording continued. David's breathing quickened now. There was a sound like something rolling across the floor, followed by a sudden metallic rattle. "Who's there?" he said sharply. Then came a second voice, faint, higher pitched. "Don't look!" The room filled with static, swelling into a low, rhythmic pulse. Then a final sentence, rushed and broken by fear. "It's not empty up here." The tape hissed for several seconds more, then cut off with a soft click. The silence that followed in the field office was thick enough to feel. Sheriff Avery exhaled. "Well, that's one hell of a thing to hear before breakfast." Lena leaned back, rubbing her temples. "There are at least 2 voices on that recording, David's and someone else's. Female. Not Caroline's. Too young. Maybe the boy?" "No," Lena said. "The pitch is wrong. And there's something strange about the background frequency. It doesn't sound like a human environment. It's too confined." Like a resonance chamber, Avery raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking there was another space above the attic? Maybe. Or a void inside the walls. A place sound could carry differently." She replayed the final section, isolating the word empty. The waveform spiked oddly, distorted, but not from damage. More like interference. "What kind of recorder was it?" she asked. Avery flipped through the old evidence photos. "Reel-to-reel, portable, battery-powered. David used it for field recordings, bird calls, stuff like that. His hobby, then it had decent fidelity for its time," Lena said. "Meaning what we're hearing is real spatial echo, not artifact." Avery frowned. "English, please." "It means the whisper wasn't standing next to him. It was coming from behind something." The sheriff shifted his weight. "Behind the wall." Lena nodded slowly. "Behind the wall." Later that afternoon, she drove back to the cabin with the forensic audio tech. Ray Sloan, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses and a habit of muttering to his equipment. They carried a portable sound scanner the size of a suitcase, its sensors designed to map echo response and detect voids behind surfaces. The house was still sealed with evidence tape, its porch wet from the morning rain. Inside, the air was cooler now, smelling faintly of pine resin and metal. The attic hatch hung half open, the wooden ladder groaning as Lena climbed again, this time with Sloan following behind, holding the scanner. He set up the sensors against the wall where the pajama sleeve had been found. The device emitted soft pulses, barely audible clicks that echoed through the rafters. Lena crouched beside him. "What are we looking for?" "Air pockets," he said, watching the monitor. "Changes in density behind the panels. If there's another cavity, we'll see it." The screen flickered. A jagged pattern formed across the display, empty spaces appearing like ghostly shapes inside the walls. "There," Sloan said quietly, pointing, "behind this beam. Roughly 3 feet wide, 1 foot tall." "Another compartment?" "Could be. The insulation makes it tricky to read. But there's definitely a void." Lena brushed her hand over the wood. "Is it accessible?" "Not unless you cut through." She nodded. "Document first, then we'll open it." They marked the section carefully. When the first cut was made, a puff of dust rose into the narrow air. The smell hit them instantly, old, dry, and faintly sweet, like long-forgotten cedar. Sloan hesitated. "You smell that?" "Yeah," Lena said, "like wood oil." He cut again, deeper this time. The panel gave with a crack, revealing a hollow lined with aged boards. Inside, wedged against the far wall, was an object wrapped in oilcloth. Lena reached in with gloved hands and pulled it free. The cloth crumbled at her touch, revealing another reel of magnetic tape. Its label smudged but partially legible. "Attic 2, June 3rd. She and Sloan exchanged a look. "Guess David wasn't done recording," he said. They sealed the reel in evidence plastic and climbed down carefully. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, slicing the forest in beams of pale gold. As Lena loaded the new evidence into her car, she paused, glancing once more toward the attic window. The glass reflected nothing now, only the trees and the sky beyond. Still, She could have sworn she saw something shift in the reflection, as if someone had just stepped back from the window. Back at the field office, the second tape was digitized within the hour. This one was shorter, barely 3 minutes long. The first sound was movement, fast, uneven. David's voice came through, panicked. "Caroline! Don't come up here! Stay downstairs with Evan!" A crash, then breathing, ragged. "It's a crawl space! Someone built a crawl space up here! God, it smells—" The recording cut to a hiss of static. Then, another voice, distorted, almost childlike. "He said he'd come back for us." Lena's hands tightened around the headphones. The tone of that voice didn't match the woman's whisper from before. This one was small, trembling, maybe even rehearsed. The recording ended with a sharp metallic sound, like a door slamming shut. Then silence. Sheriff Avery stared at the waveform on the monitor. "That's it?" "That's it," Lena said softly. The room seemed to dim around them. The faint hum of the office lights blended with the rain outside until it all sounded like distant static. She took a slow breath. "Get me the original case files again. I want every interview, every piece of evidence. We're missing something." "What do you think we're missing?" Avery asked. Lena looked up from the flickering screen, her expression unreadable. "The other voice," she said. "Whoever said, he said he'd come back for us?" They weren't talking to David. The county records building in Huntsville was as old as the McClary case itself. Its narrow hallways lined with shelves that leaned under the weight of half a century's worth of paper. Detective Lena Ward moved through the stale air, past boxes marked Unsolved 70 to 79, until she reached the one she'd requested. McClary, David and Caroline, 1978. She set it on the table beneath a flickering fluorescent light and lifted the lid. Inside were the ghosts of another time. Brittle photographs, handwritten statements, Polaroid copies from the original scene. The sheriff's notes in fading blue ink. The first page of the report hit her like déjà vu. No signs of forced entry. All doors locked from inside. Family vehicle present. No struggle. Dinner table set. The handwriting was steady, methodical. Sheriff Earl Dobson, the original investigator, had been meticulous, but his tone carried fatigue, even in ink. It was the kind of exhaustion that comes from chasing something you already know you'll never catch. Lena turned another page and froze at a newspaper clipping stapled to the back. "Local family vanishes. Sheriff urges calm." Below the headline, the grainy photo of the cabin looked almost identical to how it stood now, except for one detail. In the old photo, there was a small shed behind the main structure, just visible near the creek. She frowned. She hadn't seen any shed when she was there yesterday. "Hey," she called to the archivist, an older woman in bifocals. "Was there ever a secondary structure at the McClary site?" The woman thought a moment. "Not anymore. Torn down sometime in the 80s, I think. Storm damage, maybe. Records would be under property permits. Can I get copies?" "Already on file." The woman disappeared into a back room, leaving Lena alone with the silence and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. She flipped through the rest of the McClary file. Then something slipped loose from between two sheets and fell onto the table. A photograph. Black and white, slightly curled from age. It showed a group of people standing outside the same cabin. But not the McClarys. A different family entirely. 4 individuals. A man, a woman, a teenage girl, and a boy of about 10. They were dressed in early 70s clothing, bell-bottom jeans, collared shirts, the girl in a patterned sundress. The father's arm was around his wife's shoulders, and all of them were smiling. Written on the back in neat cursive, "The Harlows, Hollow Creek, 1972. Lena stared at the image. She'd never heard that name before in any mention of the case. She flipped back through the file. No reference to a Harlow anywhere. The archivist returned carrying a folder. "Here you go, property records, 1970 through 1985. Lena thanked her and began scanning the documents. According to the deed, the McClarys had purchased the property in April of 1978 from an estate auction. The previous owners had been listed as the Harlow family, declared missing 6 years earlier after a structure fire on their secondary property south of Hollow Creek. A chill slid down her spine. The Harlows vanished too. That evening, back in her Huntsville motel room, Lena spread both sets of files across the bed, McClary and Harlow. The parallels were eerie. Both families had disappeared under unclear circumstances, both within a 5-mile radius of Hollow Creek, both involving property transitions afterward that never raised questions. But it was a single line in Sheriff Dobson's field report that stopped her cold. Neighbor reports seeing a tall man near the cabin 2 nights prior. Thin-build, wearing a dark coat. Claimed he was helping fix the roof. Description consistent with local handyman Royce Harlow. Harlow. The name matched the missing family from 1972. So the McClarys had been interacting with a man tied to a prior disappearance, one that had taken place at the same property. Lena leaned back against the headboard, the weight of the realization pressing down like a second gravity. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the digitized county archives until she found a small, forgotten article dated October 12, 1972. Harlow residence destroyed by fire. No survivors recovered. Cause undetermined. No survivors. No remains either, according to the addendum. She zoomed in on the accompanying photo of the burned-out structure. The pattern of the beams, the slope of the roof. It was almost identical to the attic design of the McClary cabin. The same builder, maybe. The same blueprint. She whispered to herself, what if it's not 2 cases? What if it's the same one repeating? At dawn, she met Sheriff Avery at the diner near the county line. The smell of coffee and bacon grease filled the air. The sheriff was already there, thumbing through his own copy of the case summary. Lena slid into the booth. The McClarys bought the cabin from an estate sale, she began. The previous owners were the Harlows. They went missing 6 years earlier. No record of bodies, no closure, just fire damage and a transfer of ownership. Avery raised an eyebrow. You're saying lightning struck twice in the same place? Not lightning, Lena said quietly. Something else. He took a slow sip of coffee. You think this Royce Harlow fella survived the fire? Or someone using his name? Someone who built that cabin and whatever's inside it. The sheriff frowned. Inside it. The false walls. The compartments. The crawl space where the second tape was found. Those aren't renovations, Avery. They're original features. They were built into the structure from the beginning. Avery sat back, the leather of the booth creaking. You think he built hiding spaces? Lena's voice lowered. Or holding spaces. The words hung between them like a fog neither wanted to breathe. After a long silence, the sheriff said, You want to go back out there? I need to, she said. If the McClarys were his second family, then maybe the attic wasn't just where it ended. Maybe it's where it started. Avery nodded reluctantly. We'll need a warrant to excavate anything structural. I'll have it by noon. As she left the diner, the morning light was sharp, slicing through the lingering mist. She paused on the steps, glancing east toward the line of hills that hid Hollow Creek from view. The forest looked almost calm from this distance, a green sea beneath the sky. But she could feel it watching her, the same quiet pressure she'd felt standing inside the cabin, as if the land itself remembered too much. In her mind, she replayed the faint voice from the tape. He said he'd come back for us. Not a threat, she realized, a promise. And if that promise had outlived the man who made it, then something in those woods was still waiting to be found. By midday, the warrant had come through, and the road to Hollow Creek shimmered beneath the early autumn sun. Dust trailed behind Sheriff Avery's cruiser as it wound through miles of pines toward the McClary property. The storm had washed the forest clean, leaving the smell of sap and wet soil sharp in the air. Detective Lena Ward sat in the passenger seat, a folded topographic map spread across her knees. According to the 1972 records, she said, tracing a line with her finger, the outbuilding should be 70 yards east of the main cabin near the creek bend. Where the ground dips? Avery asked, eyes on the dirt road. Exactly. But the structure's gone. Either burned or collapsed decades ago. He grunted. Then we'll look for the footprint. They parked near the cabin. The board still creaked under the strain of time, and the half-open attic hatch above them looked like an unblinking eye. Lena forced herself not to stare at it too long. She followed Avery through the trees, boots sinking in the damp moss. Within minutes, they found the depression she'd seen on the map. A shallow, rectangular sink in the earth lined with bits of charred wood. The scent of old ash still clung faintly to the soil. "Here," Lena said quietly. Avery crouched, poking at the blackened remains with a stick. "Looks like a foundation beam." She knelt beside him. Beneath the char lay the edge of a concrete slab, its corners moss-covered but intact. In the center, something glinted faintly. Lena brushed away the dirt and revealed a rusted iron ring bolted into the slab. The sheriff frowned. "A tether point? Or a handle?" They exchanged a glance. Avery knelt and pulled. The ring resisted, then shifted with a long, protesting groan. Beneath it, a square outline appeared in the concrete, sealed shut with decades of grime. Lena's pulse quickened. "It's a hatch." Together they cleared the debris. When the panel finally lifted, the smell that rushed out was thick and stale, trapped air that hadn't seen daylight since the 70s. Avery clicked on his flashlight and peered down. A narrow shaft descended into darkness, the concrete walls sweating with moisture. A ladder, half rotted, vanished into the gloom. "Lord help us," he muttered. "It goes deep." Lena stared into the black. "Get the rope and masks." By the time the evidence team arrived, the afternoon light had turned honey-colored. They secured the perimeter, cataloged the opening, and lowered an oxygen sensor first. No toxic gases, just stagnant air. Lena clipped on a headlamp and descended, the ladder creaking beneath her boots. 10 feet down, her beam struck dirt. The floor was earthen, packed hard, and the walls had once been whitewashed but were now stained with age. She crouched, sweeping the light slowly across the chamber. It wasn't large, perhaps 12 by 8 feet, but the far wall bore something unexpected. Rows of shelves, carefully built into the concrete. On them sat glass jars, sealed tight with waxed lids. Inside each jar floated scraps of paper, photographs, bits of fabric, and Lena swallowed hard. What looked like locks of hair, preserved in liquid. "Sheriff," she called up, her voice echoing. "You need to see this." Avery's boots clanged against the ladder rungs as he descended beside her. His flashlight beam joined hers, gliding over the jars. "Jesus," he murmured. The nearest shelf held a faded Polaroid, its image distorted but still visible. A girl in a sundress, smiling beside the creek. On the back, written in that same neat cursive Lena had seen before, "Anna Harlow, age 12. Next to it, another jar, a strip of cloth printed with cartoon animals. Beneath it, another photo, this time of a boy, younger, missing front teeth. "Evan McClary, age 6. Lena's hand trembled as she lifted the jar, her gloves squeaking against the glass. "He cataloged them," she whispered. "He kept pieces." Avery's jaw tightened. "This was a trophy room." They continued scanning. Some jars were empty, their wax seals cracked. Others contained soil samples, small stones, feathers, but everyone bore a name, handwritten in the same looping script. "Whoever built this place didn't build a shed," Lena said. "They built a vault." She turned to the far corner where the beam of her light caught on metal. A box, maybe a foot square, half buried in the dirt. She knelt, brushing away the soil until its edges were clear. A small padlock hung from the latch, rusted but intact. Avery handed her his knife. She wedged it beneath the lock until the brittle metal gave with a snap. Inside lay several cassette tapes, each carefully labeled. Anna, June 10th, 1972. Evan, June 3rd, 1978. Royce, instructions. Lena exhaled slowly. He documented everything. Avery rubbed the back of his neck. Then we've got the bastard's own voice. By dusk, the evidence crew had sealed the vault and begun cataloging the jars one by one. Lena sat on the hood of the cruiser, scribbling notes beneath the fading orange sky. Avery joined her, his hat pushed back, eyes weary. "State Lab's on standby," he said. "They'll process the tapes tonight." "Good," Lena replied. "We'll start with the one marked Royce." He hesitated. "You think he's the killer?" She looked toward the tree line where the shadows deepened and the sound of cicadas filled the air. "I think the killer learned from him. Maybe even carried it forward." Avery followed her gaze. "You mean a copycat?" "No," Lena said softly. "A continuation." They fell silent as the forest darkened. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of damp concrete and something metallic, blood memory, lingering. Lena closed her notebook. "Tomorrow, we listen. Tonight, I want those jars guarded around the clock." Avery nodded. "You planning to sleep?" "Not yet." She looked once more toward the dark woods. "Someone waited 40 years for us to open that hatch. I want to know what else they left behind." At midnight, as the evidence truck rumbled away with its cargo, Lena lingered by the creek. The moonlight shimmered across the water, and the forest seemed impossibly still. She crouched, tracing the edge of the mud with her flashlight. There, half buried in the bank, was something round and dull. She brushed away the silt. A jar, its lid cracked open, the wax long gone. Inside was a fragment of paper, water-stained but legible. In faint blue ink, one sentence remained. "He's building another house." Lena stared at it for a long time before slipping the jar into an evidence bag. The forest around her whispered in the dark, as though repeating the line to itself, over and over. The State Audio Lab sat in a squat brick building on the edge of Huntsville's industrial district. Its windows were dark at 1 a.m., but the technicians were still inside, faces lit by the pale glow of monitors. The air smelled faintly of ozone and coffee grounds. Detective Lena Ward stood behind the glass of the isolation booth, arms folded, watching as the first of the 3 cassette tapes, labeled Royce Instructions, spun inside a restored Sony TC-110. The analog hum filled the speakers. Then a man's voice came through, low and measured. "You listen before you build." You listen to the house. Lena felt the small hairs on her neck rise. If the boards creak right, the air pockets carry sound like lungs. That's where you make your rooms. Not too deep, just enough for them to breathe. The voice had a southern drawl, but calm, almost soothing. It sounded like a craftsman explaining his trade. "A house can keep secrets if you teach it how." The tape clicked, hissed, then continued. "You start with the attic. Always the attic. It remembers warmth, footsteps, storms. When the wind shifts, it hides the rest." Lena motioned for the technician to pause. "Can we isolate background noise?" The young man in headphones nodded, toggling filters. Beneath the voice emerged a faint rhythmic sound, hammering, steady, and deliberate. Somewhere in that room, 47 years earlier, someone was building while Royce recorded. The technician unmuted again. "They won't scream at first," Royce went on, "not when the walls are fresh. But the house learns. It soaks in what they say. That's how you keep the next ones quiet." Static swallowed the last word. The tape ended. Lena stared through the glass for a long moment, her reflection pale against the dark. "Run the other 2, she said finally. Tape 2. Anna, June 10th, 1972. A faint giggle opened the recording. Hi, nervous. Is this a game? A girl's voice asked. It's a kind of game, Royce replied gently. You just sit still, sweetheart. The microphone likes when you whisper, okay. There was movement, a chair scraping. Then the child said, Can I go back outside soon? Royce's answer was almost affectionate. After we finish. Houses need voices before they're finished. Yours will echo real nice. The sound warped, tape stretched from age, then a faint sob, quickly muffled. Lena turned away from the monitor, her jaw tight. Cut it. The technician hesitated. There's about 20 seconds left. Cut it. The stop button clicked. Silence returned, heavy as the air before thunder. Sheriff Avery, who had joined them halfway through, rubbed his forehead. That man was teaching himself how to make prisons out of buildings. Lena nodded. And recording the process. Why keep the tapes? Because they were part of it. Every room he built, every voice he captured, it all became the house's memory. Tape 3. Evan, June 3rd, 1978. The hiss at the start was louder on this one, but a child's breathing could be heard, fast, frightened. Where's my mom? She's downstairs, a man replied. She's safe. You'll see her soon. The child whimpered. It's dark. Dark keeps you hidden, the man said. Hidden means safe. Then came shuffling, metal scraping, like a hatch closing. Please let me out. You'll hear the birds in the morning, the man said quietly. Just listen. There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, a different voice. Female, older. Royce, stop. Lena leaned forward. Rewind that. The technician did. They listened again. The woman's voice was faint, but unmistakably pleading. Royce, stop! A scuffle followed, muffled, distant. Then the recording cut to static and silence. Avery exhaled through his nose. That wasn't Caroline McClary, was it? Lena shook her head slowly. Too rough, too low. Sounds closer to mid-30s. Maybe a housekeeper, neighbor, someone who knew what he was doing. Or a partner, Avery suggested grimly. They ended the session near dawn. The tapes were sealed in evidence containers, but the words lingered like an aftertaste neither could shake. Outside, fog hung low over the parking lot, glowing gold under the streetlights. Lena leaned against her car, exhausted. He called them instructions. Avery. That means he expected someone to follow them. The sheriff lit a cigarette, his hand trembling slightly. You think he had an apprentice? Maybe more than one. She stared at the rising fog. The voice on that last tape, whoever she was, she knew enough to tell him to stop. Maybe she didn't. He blew out smoke, eyes narrowing. And the line you found in that jar, he's building another house, could have been her warning. Lena nodded. If Royce died in the 70s, someone else might have carried on the work. Later that morning, she returned to the motel and showered until the water ran cold. The mirror fogged, and she wiped it clear with her palm. For an instant, she saw her own face framed by wooden beams, the imagined outline of an attic around her reflection. She blinked, and it was gone. By noon, she was back at her desk, cross-referencing every building permit filed near Hollow Creek between 1978 and 1982. Most were barns, storage sheds, hunting cabins. But one entry caught her eye. R. Harlow and Associates, Structural Additions, Private Estate, Coldwater Hollow, Alabama. Permit number 401C. Date: April 1979. 1 year after the McClarys vanished. The listed builder, Royce Harlow, Jr. Her pulse steadied to a cold rhythm. Junior, she whispered. He had a son. She flipped through the old personnel indexes. Sure enough, Royce Harlow, Jr., born 1958, had filed business registrations in 3 counties through the early 80s. Then his name disappeared from all public records around 1984. A knock at the door made her jump. Sheriff Avery stepped in, holding a printout. Got something from State DMV. Harlow Jr.'s last registered vehicle was a blue pickup. License expired in '84. But look here. He handed her the paper. The address listed wasn't Alabama. It was Rivers Bend, Tennessee, barely 2 hours north. Maybe that's where he built the next one, Avery said. Lena stared at the page, the memory of Royce Sr.'s voice echoing in her head. A house can keep secrets if you teach it how. She folded the printout carefully. Then we'd better see what it's been keeping. That night, before leaving for Tennessee, Lena made one last stop at the evidence room. The jars from the underground vault were neatly labeled on steel shelves. She found the one marked Evan McClary and held it up to the light. The lock of hair inside floated gently, preserved in clear liquid. Beside it, a small scrap of newspaper was folded tight. She hadn't noticed it before. With tweezers, she unfolded the fragment and read the headline. Construction set to begin on Rivers Bend Retreat, 1979. Below the headline was a photo, grainy, black and white, of a half-finished cabin perched above a river valley. The foundation beams were unmistakably the same design as the McClary attic. Lena closed the jar, heart pounding. The next house already existed, and if the pattern held true, someone, or something, was still inside it. The Tennessee line appeared in the windshield like a ghost of green highway signs, half hidden by fog. Sheriff Avery's cruiser hummed along the 2-lane road that wound through the Cumberland foothills. Pines thickened on both sides, their trunks silver in the dawn light. Detective Lena Ward held the DMV printout between her fingers. The ink had smudged from handling, but the name was still clear. Royce Harlow Jr. Rivers Bend Retreat. 2 hours north of Hollow Creek, Avery muttered, glancing at the map. Funny how he didn't go far. Predators rarely do, Lena said. They stay close to where they learn the pattern. The road narrowed to gravel, the GPS losing signal. Ahead, a wooden gate leaned crooked across the path. A faded sign hung from one chain. Private property key. Keep out. Beyond it, a faint track led upward into the trees. Avery cut the engine. Looks deserted. Let's check, Lena said, already stepping into the morning chill. The air smelled of river mud and cedar. Their boots crunched on fallen needles as they climbed the path. After half a mile, the forest opened into a clearing. And there it was. The Rivers Bend house stood on a bluff above the Tennessee River, gray-timbered, weathered, but intact. Its roofline matched the old photograph perfectly, and a single chimney rose like a watchtower. The porch sagged under vines, but the windows were unbroken. The place looked preserved, not abandoned. Avery exhaled. 40-odd years, and it's still standing. Lena's eyes moved across the structure, cataloging details. Identical beam spacing, the same angled gables, the attic window dead center. He built a replica, she said softly, down to the frame. They circled the perimeter first. The grass was high but not overgrown. Someone had cut it recently. Near the back porch, Avery crouched, pointing to fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Someone's been driving up here. Lena's pulse quickened. Could be squatters. Or the one who built it, Avery finished. Inside, the air was cool and still. Dust lay thick on the furniture, yet there was no sign of decay. Tools hung neatly on pegs in the kitchen wall. A lantern sat centered on the table, its wick clean, as if waiting. Feels staged, Avery murmured. Lena knelt beside the hearth. Beneath the ashes was fresh soot. Days old, not decades. Someone's been lighting fires. They moved room to room. Each space was bare except for one or two deliberate objects. A rocking chair beside a window. A child's wooden block on a shelf. A mirror nailed too high to reflect anything but the ceiling. When they reached the staircase, Lena stopped. The banister was smooth under her fingertips, and halfway up, A faint handprint darkened the dust. Small, child-sized. Avery's voice dropped. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" "Yeah," she whispered. "Someone's been here recently and brought a child." The steps groaned as they ascended. At the landing, a hallway stretched ahead, ending at a closed door. From behind it came a faint ticking, irregular but steady. Avery drew his sidearm. "You ready?" Lena nodded. They approached slowly. She turned the knob. The door opened on a narrow attic space lined with unfinished pine. At the center of the floor stood an old reel-to-reel recorder, its reels turning lazily, though no one touched it. The ticking was the motor. The tape itself was almost finished, the brown ribbon feeding through like breath. Avery reached to stop it, but Lena caught his wrist. "Wait!" A final voice came through the small built-in speaker, hoarse, older, worn by time. "If you found this place, then you already know. The house needs new walls. The old ones remember too much." The words crackled, then ended with a single click. The reels spun out empty. Lena crouched beside the machine. "That wasn't Royce Sr.," she said quietly. "That's a man in his 60s, maybe 70s. Could be Junior Avery's jaw tightened, which means he's still alive." She nodded. Or was, recently. They searched the attic. In the far corner lay a stack of lumber, freshly cut. Nearby, a rolled blueprint, yellowed but still legible. Lena unrolled it across the floorboards. The drawing showed the same house, identical dimensions, except for one addition marked in red pencil. "Basement Chamber B." Avery looked around. "There's no basement." "There will be," Lena said. He was starting to build it. Her flashlight found something else beneath the boards, a small hole where a plank had been lifted. She pried it wider and shone the light through. Beneath, a narrow pit had been dug into the clay, 6 feet deep, smooth-walled. A chill rippled through her. He wasn't just replicating the attic this time. He was expanding downward. They resealed the hatch and stepped back into daylight. The forest seemed to press closer now, the wind whispering through the leaves like breath over glass. Avery radioed the county office for backup and forensic teams. As they waited, Lena wandered to the bluff's edge. The river moved slow and dark below, its surface catching glints of afternoon sun. In her mind, she replayed the old recordings. The children's voices, Royce's instructions, the phrase that haunted every discovery. "He said he'd come back for us." She turned toward the house, its attic window staring down at her like an unblinking eye. Somewhere inside that frame, in air that had waited nearly half a century, she felt the presence of someone still listening. By the time the forensic vans reached River's Bend, evening had pulled a copper haze across the valley. Detective Lena Ward and Sheriff Avery stood at the tree line, watching techs sweep the yard with handheld scanners while the river murmured far below. Wind carried the smell of damp pine and something else. Wood smoke. "Somebody's burning nearby," Avery said. Lena nodded toward the forest's edge. "That's upwind. If it's new, they're close." They followed the smell through the undergrowth, flashlights cutting thin beams through the gloom. After 200 yards, they found a narrow trail. Boot prints pressed into soft earth, recent enough that water still pooled in the impressions. One set large, one small. 2 people, Lena murmured. Adult male, juvenile stride. Avery frowned. Could be hikers. Not this deep, not with no lights. They kept walking until a flicker of orange broke through the trees. Ahead, in a small clearing by the river, a campfire burned low. Beside it sat a canvas tent and an old pickup whose license plate was coated with grime but legible beneath the soot. RBN 401C, the same number from the 1979 building permit. Avery's hand went to his weapon. "You ready?" Lena gave a single nod. They stepped into the clearing. "State police," she called. "Hands where I can see them." The tent rustled. A figure emerged, a tall man with gray hair and hollow cheeks, his clothes stiff with dirt. His eyes caught the flashlight beam and flashed pale, animal bright. "I know why you're here," he said. His voice was soft, cracked by age. "You finally found the house?" Lena steadied her aim. "Royce Harlow, Jr." He smiled faintly. "That was my father's name. You used it on the permits." "Because it belonged to the work." He stepped closer to the firelight, palms raised. The right hand trembled. A crude scar ran from wrist to elbow, long healed. Avery said, "Where's the child?" We saw small prints. The man's gaze shifted toward the truck. "He's safe, better than I ever was." "Step away from the vehicle," Avery ordered. Harlow didn't move. "You don't understand what that house is. It keeps the voices. They never stop talking to me." Lena's stomach tightened. "You're saying you hear them?" He laughed once, a dry, broken sound. "Here? I built them. Every wall remembers. You opened it again, didn't you?" Avery inched forward, but the man suddenly turned and yanked open the truck's door. A flash of movement, a child, maybe 8 or 9, scrambled out and bolted toward the trees. "Hey!" Avery shouted. He ran after the boy while Lena lunged toward Harlow, tackling him against the door. They hit the ground hard. Dust rose in the lamplight. The old man fought weakly, mumbling, "Don't let them seal it. The house has to breathe." Lena cuffed him, breathing hard. "It's over, Royce." "No," he rasped, eyes unfocused. Starting again. A gunshot cracked somewhere in the woods. Lena froze. "Avery!" No answer, only the echo rolling through the valley. She dragged Harlow upright, pushing him toward the fire. "Sit!" He obeyed, shaking. Minutes stretched. Then a voice called faintly from the trees. "Lena!" Avery emerged, breathless, the child in his arms. "He's alive," he said. "Scared to death, but alive." The boy clung to his jacket, whispering something over and over. Lena knelt beside him. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now. What's your name?" The boy's eyes were wide, pupils huge in the firelight. "Evan," he said. "He told me my name was Evan." Lena felt the ground tilt beneath her. "What?" Avery's expression darkened. "That's impossible." But the child nodded hard. "He said I had to remember for them. The other ones in the walls behind them." Harlow began to laugh quietly, rocking where he sat. "Every house needs a memory," he murmured. "You tear one down, it builds another. It finds a new voice to live in." Avery started to speak, but the sound died when the river wind shifted. From far up the hill came the faint echo of boards creaking, the same slow rhythm they'd heard in the McClary attic. Lena looked toward the house silhouetted against the stars. Its attic window gleamed faintly, reflecting the fire. For an instant, she thought she saw a figure standing there, small and still, watching. When she blinked, it was gone. She turned back to Harlow, but the old man had slumped sideways, heart finally stilled. His last smile lingered, thin and content. Avery drew a shaky breath. "What the hell did we just stop?" Lena stared at the river, the current whispering below. "I'm not sure we stopped it," she said quietly. "I think we just found where it moved." The boy pressed his face into her shoulder, whispering again. "He said he'd come back." 2 days after Royce Harlow Jr.'s death, the investigation returned to Alabama. The boy, quiet, wary, still insisting his name was Evan, had been transferred to a child welfare facility in Huntsville for evaluation. He spoke little, except to ask whether the house could still hear him. Detective Lena Ward hadn't slept more than an hour since that night by the river. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the tape's voice again. Royce's whisper, "You listen before you build." She and Sheriff Avery drove the same road back to Hollow Creek in silence. The air was thick with early morning fog. the kind that blurred the tree line into a gray wall. When the cabin appeared through the mist, it looked smaller somehow, like it had been holding its breath for 47 years and was finally exhaling. The state forensic seal still crossed the doorway. Lena cut it carefully. "Let's finish what we started," she said. Inside, the air was colder than before. The dust they disturbed on their last visit had resettled, and the faint smell of ozone clung to everything, like the aftertaste of a storm. Avery set up a portable recorder. The department's sound engineer wanted a full acoustic map of the attic. They climbed the narrow ladder together. The hatch groaned. At first glance, the attic hadn't changed. Empty boards, low beams, the hole where they'd found the second tape. But as Lena switched on her light, she noticed something new. Thin scratches on the far wall, 4 parallel lines cut clean into the wood, as if by fingernails. Avery crouched beside them. "Those weren't here before." "No." Lena's stomach knotted. "Someone's been up here since the site was closed." The sheriff swept his flashlight across the rafters. "You think Junior came back before we caught him? Or someone else did?" She turned on the recorder, letting the microphone take in the silence. The soft hum of wind through the vent. The occasional tick of cooling timber. Then faintly, something else. A whisper. They froze. "Playback," Avery said. Lena hit the button. The recorded sound filled the attic. Static, then a voice, low and breathy. "He's still here." Her throat went dry. "That wasn't either of us," she said. "Could be interference," Avery offered, though his tone lacked conviction. Lena looked toward the rafters. "Or it could be the house doing what he said it could do, keeping memory." They recorded for another 15 minutes. Each time the tape played back, new fragments emerged. A child's laugh, a faint scraping, a single knock. The sound tech who later analyzed it would confirm the frequencies were non-electronic, resonant, produced inside the room at the time of recording. Avery rubbed his temples. "I don't like this one bit." "Neither do I," she admitted. "But it's evidence. Whatever happened here, it's imprinted in the structure." They descended the ladder, sealing the hatch behind them. As they stepped into daylight, the fog had lifted, leaving the forest washed in weak sun. For a moment, the cabin looked almost peaceful, just another relic of old lumber and stories. Then a sharp crash sounded from inside. Both spun around. The noise had come from upstairs, the unmistakable slam of a door, but they had locked everything behind them. Avery drew his weapon again. "You armed?" Lena nodded. They re-entered cautiously. The living room was undisturbed, except for dust swirling where the sunlight cut through the window. The door at the end of the hallway, the one that led to the stairwell, now stood wide open. "Stay sharp," Avery whispered. They advanced. The air felt heavier the closer they got, as if pressure itself thickened. From somewhere above came another sound, a dragging step, slow, deliberate. The same creak they had heard at River's Bend. Lena looked up. Attic again. They climbed. The space was dim, beams slicing the light into narrow bars. Nothing moved, but on the floor near the far wall, a single Polaroid lay face down. Lena picked it up, careful not to smudge it. When she turned it over, her chest tightened. The image showed this same attic, taken from the hatch. 2 figures stood where she and Avery were standing now, faint, blurred, but recognizable. Her short, dark hair, his broad shoulders. On the bottom margin, written in the same neat cursive that had haunted every discovery, was one sentence: "Every house keeps what it's shown." Avery's voice was barely audible. "When was that taken?" She shook her head. "There's no flash residue, no camera in sight." He swallowed. "Then who took it?" Outside, wind rattled the boards. The attic light flickered. In the sudden half-darkness, Lena thought she saw movement behind the wall, shadows shifting in rhythm with the faint tick of the recorder below. She blinked, and the motion stopped. Avery touched her shoulder. "Let's get out before this place decides to keep us too." They left the photo sealed in an evidence bag and stepped out into the fading light. The forest seemed to hold its breath again as they drove away, tires crunching on gravel until the cabin vanished behind the trees. Halfway down the road, Avery said quietly, "You think it's over?" Lena watched the mirror. In it, the distant shape of the cabin shrank until it was just a dot between the pines. Yet for a heartbeat, no longer. She could have sworn the attic window reflected firelight. "No," she said at last. "I think it's waiting for someone else to listen." The child sat in the corner of the interview room, knees drawn to his chest, watching the rain streak across the one-way glass. His file listed him as Evan Doe, approximate age 9. No records, no matches in any missing persons database. He barely ate, slept in short fits, and woke crying without sound. Detective Lena Ward had spent the last 3 hours sitting across from him, speaking softly, waiting for him to trust the quiet. Sheriff Avery watched from behind the glass, arms crossed, his reflection a dark shape over the boy's small frame. "Evan," Lena said gently, "do you remember where you lived before the woods?" The boy hesitated. "In the rooms under the stairs," he whispered finally. "But the house was too loud." She leaned forward. "Too loud?" "The walls talk when the lights go out," he said. "They don't like it when people leave." Lena felt a chill climb the back of her neck. "Who told you that?" "Mr. Harlow." The boy's voice dropped. "He said they'd follow me if I didn't remember." A nurse entered quietly with a cup of cocoa. Evan flinched, then calmed as she set it beside him. The steam fogged his reflection in the glass. "Evan," Lena said after a moment, "when you say they, who are you talking about?" The boy stared at his hands. "The ones in the pictures." Lena's stomach tightened. "What pictures?" He looked up. His eyes were gray-blue, the same color as the river that ran past River's Bend. "In the attic. The ones on the floor. They move when you turn your back behind the glass." Avery swore under his breath. "Christ, Lena, he's describing the attic." She nodded slightly, never taking her eyes off the child. "You've seen them yourself, haven't you?" He gave a small nod. "They whisper when the lights go out." "They said my real name once." Lena swallowed. "What did they call you?" "Caleb," he murmured. Avery stiffened. "We've got a Caleb Harlow missing from 2016, he said through the intercom. "Royce's son." Lena's hand trembled slightly as she switched off the mic. "Evan, Caleb, did Mr. Harlow tell you he was your father?" The boy nodded. "He said I was made for remembering. He said I had to keep their voices safe." "What voices?" The child's gaze drifted toward the far wall, as though listening to something only he could hear. "The ones that live in the wood. They said he promised not to close them up again. But he lied." Rain hammered harder against the window. Lena glanced toward the hallway mirror. Her reflection looked blurred, as if the glass itself had fogged from the inside. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. A social worker entered carrying a folder. "Detective, you'll want to see this," she said quietly. "We ran DNA from the child's toothbrush." Lena stepped outside. Avery met her halfway. The woman handed her the file. "It's a 99.8% match to Royce Harlow, Jr." Avery exhaled slowly. "So he was his son?" "Not just that," the worker continued. "There's another partial match. Older sample from an unsolved case in 1980. A missing child named Evelyn Mari Harlow." Royce's sister Lena stared at the papers, her pulse quickening. "You're saying—" "They share maternal DNA, half-siblings. Or clones," Avery muttered darkly. Whatever kind of madness Royce was breeding in that house. They returned to the room. Evan, Caleb, sat very still, eyes fixed on something behind them. Lena turned. For a split second, The reflection in the glass showed not two figures but three, an indistinct silhouette standing just behind Avery's shoulder. Then it was gone. The boy spoke again, barely above a whisper. He said the attic keeps copies. That's where the next voice is made. Avery crouched beside him. Caleb, what did he mean by next voice? He said the house wasn't finished, the child murmured. It needs new walls to remember more things. He looked directly at Lena. You went inside, didn't you? Her throat tightened. Yes. Then it remembers you now. The words hung there, soft as dust. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming louder for a moment before steadying again. Avery rose. That's enough for tonight. They escorted the boy back to his room, a converted office with barred windows and soft toys untouched on the bed. As the nurse guided him inside, he turned to Lena. If you go back there, he said, don't open the floor. What floor? The one under the stairs, he whispered. That's where he kept the ones who couldn't forget. After he was gone, Avery rubbed his eyes. You believe any of that? Lena stared through the glass at the empty chair where the boy had been. I believe he's remembering something someone wanted buried. And if what he says is true, there's more to that cabin than an attic. Avery frowned. You think there's a basement? Or something worse, she said. Outside, the rain eased to a soft drizzle. The fluorescent hum faded. For a brief instant, from somewhere deep inside the building, a faint knock echoed. 3 slow taps. Lena froze. Did you hear that? Avery listened. Silence. Then, faintly, almost kind, came a child's voice through the intercom, though no one was in the control booth. Don't let it close again. By dawn, the rain had passed, leaving the air clean and metallic. Lena Ward drove in silence, the road slick with dew, the woods on either side glistening in the gray morning light. Sheriff Avery followed close behind in his cruiser, the headlights cutting through low fog. They had the warrant now. The cabin at Hollow Creek was officially a crime scene again, its foundation scheduled for excavation, its secrets finally forced into daylight. But daylight felt thin here. When they arrived, the mist still clung to the ground, curling around the porch posts like ghostly fingers. The door stood ajar, though they'd padlocked it 2 nights ago. Avery's jaw tightened. Someone beat us to it. Lena pushed it open. The interior smelled of wet earth and cold ash. The furniture was gone, hauled out during the first sweep, but something new had appeared. Muddy footprints crossing the floor toward the staircase. They were small, barefoot. Lena knelt. Child-sized. Caleb? Avery asked, voice low. He's still at the facility. They checked him in at midnight. Then who the hell? A sound interrupted him. A soft creak above them, like a board flexing under weight. Both looked up at once. The attic again, Avery muttered. Lena's instincts told her otherwise. The sound wasn't overhead. It was under them, vibrating faintly through the planks beneath her boots. She walked toward the staircase, crouching where the first riser met the wall. There, a faint seam, almost invisible unless you knew to look. The paint along one edge was cracked in a perfect rectangle. This is it, she said. The floor under the stairs. Avery fetched a pry bar from the truck. Together they wedged it into the seam and leaned their weight against it. The board lifted with a sigh, revealing a dark void beneath. The smell that rose was old and wrong, a mix of rot, soil, and something faintly metallic. Lena shone her flashlight inside. Steps descended into a narrow, earthen space no more than 4 feet high. She crouched, pulling her scarf over her mouth. Let's see what was worth sealing. Avery hesitated. You sure? She gave him a look. We've come this far. The flashlight beam sliced through the dark. The cellar, or crawl space, stretched only 10 feet before ending at a concrete wall. The soil was disturbed, recently turned. At the center lay a small wooden crate, half buried. They knelt beside it. The wood was damp but intact, a crude latch still holding the lid. Avery pried it open carefully. Inside were bones, tiny, fragile, arranged neatly like museum specimens. Alongside them lay a row of cassette tapes, each labeled with a year. 1978, 1980, 1983, 1985. Lena's breath caught. He recorded everything. Avery swallowed. These look like animal bones. No. She pointed to a small, curved fragment. Those are human, child-sized. The air seemed to close in around them. The low ceiling pressed against their backs as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Lena reached for one of the tapes. The label read, Voice 4, Evelyn. She stared at the name. That's the sister. The one the DNA matched. Christ, Avery whispered. He buried them down here. A faint noise interrupted them. Static, whispering, coming not from their radios but from below. Lena's flashlight wavered. Do you hear that? It was faint but unmistakable. A child's voice, recorded, playing somewhere nearby. The sound of breathing. Then, don't let him build another. Avery's skin prickled. Where's that coming from? Lena aimed her beam toward the back wall. The sound grew louder. She brushed away loose soil and exposed something smooth. Plastic casing embedded in concrete. She dug with her hands until a tape recorder emerged, its battery compartment corroded, but the reels inside still turning, impossibly alive. She lifted it out. The whirring stopped. Then, through the dead speaker, a man's voice spoke, clear, calm, chillingly sane. Prototype completed. Voice replication successful. Subject responded to auditory cue number 6, maternal imprint. Lena's eyes met Avery's. It's him. Royce. Testing proves memory echo sustainable. Once buried, resonance increases. The structure learns to respond autonomously. The tape clicked, then went silent. Avery whispered, He was experimenting on them. Using the house as part of it, Lena nodded slowly. Memory echo. The house learns to respond. It's not superstition, Avery. It's psychophysiological conditioning. He was teaching these children to become the memory of the place. They replaced the tape carefully. We need to get these to the lab, Avery said. Right now. But as they turned toward the steps, something shifted behind them. A deep groan as the soil settled. A thin crack zigzagged across the concrete wall, widening as the earth shuddered. Move! Lena shouted. They scrambled up the stairs as dirt cascaded around them. The floor above buckled, but they managed to haul themselves through the opening before the cellar collapsed in a rush of dust. Outside, the morning light had turned harsh and colorless. The cabin stood silent again, its porch sagging as if exhausted. Avery coughed, brushing dirt from his jacket. That place is cursed. Lena stared at the hole they'd opened. Beneath the settling dust, she could still hear faint echoes, snatches of words, laughter, a child's hum, seeping up through the floorboards. It's not cursed, she said quietly. It's remembering. Avery shook his head. What the hell does that even mean? Lena looked toward the woods, where the mist was rising once more. It means the house isn't done speaking yet. The tapes were laid out in a sterile circle of light at the forensic lab, their black casings glinting like relics of another century. Each was numbered in neat white ink, each humming faintly with the quiet menace of recorded memory. Detective Lena Ward sat beside the playback console, headphones ready. Sheriff Avery stood behind her, arms folded, jaw tight. A technician adjusted the volume knob. Tape 12, he said, last in sequence. Dated November the 18th, 1978. The day the Harlows vanished. The machine clicked. A burst of static filled the room, then a voice. Male, steady, deliberate. Subject E is resisting. Mother remains compliant. The house registers elevated frequency. Lena's pulse quickened. "That's Royce," she whispered. Another voice followed, a woman's, faint, weary. "Royce, please. She's just a child. She has to learn. The resonance won't hold otherwise. It's not just memory, Evelyn. It's continuity. The house will live through her." There was a struggle, a crash, then the sound of a child crying. "Daddy, stop!" Then silence. Lena's throat tightened. The static swelled, then softened into rhythmic tapping. 3 slow knocks. The same pattern that had followed them since the attic. Avery leaned closer. "Pause that. Play it backward." The technician reversed the tape. The knocks became a whisper, 4 syllables drawn out through distortion. "Don't close the door." Lena removed her headphones, her face pale. He trapped them in resonance cycles. Every time the sound replays, the memory reawakens. Avery frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning the house replays them like tapes." She looked down at the final cassette. Its label had no name, only the word "Return." "Play it," she said. The tape hissed. For a few seconds, nothing. Then came her own voice. "Detective Lena Ward, Alabama State Investigation, June 14th, 2025. Entry log." She froze. "That's me," she whispered. Avery's eyes widened. "What the hell?" Cabin site cleared for re-entry. Audio anomalies persistent. Possible environmental echo. The recording continued for 30 seconds, recounting their actions at the cabin 2 days ago. Every word exact. End log. Entering attic. Then, faintly, another voice, her voice, but older, broken, overlapping the original. "Don't open the floor." It starts again. Lena's hands trembled. "That's not on any of my files." "I never said that." The tape clicked off. Avery stared at the reels turning. "How could that exist before you even recorded it?" She looked at him, eyes glassy. "Because the house didn't just remember the past. It remembers forward." A power surge flickered through the lights. The console crackled. On the central monitor, spectral readings spiked. Frequencies between 17 and 19 hertz, the range just below human hearing. The technician swore. "We're getting feedback from somewhere. It's not the tape." The intercom speaker hissed. "Detective Ward?" Lena's head snapped up. "Who patched that?" No one answered. The voice came again, lower now, layered with static. "You opened the floor." Avery ripped the mic cable from the wall, but the voice persisted, echoing from the tape deck, the monitor, the vents. "You listened. Now you remember." The lights flared white, then died, plunging the lab into half-darkness. The faint smell of wet wood filled the air. Somewhere in the dark, boards creaked. The sound of a house settling. A beam of Lena's flashlight cut across the room. On the far wall, moisture spread outward in a slow pattern, rectangular, vertical, like a door taking shape where no door had been. "Back away," Avery said. But Lena stepped closer. The pattern darkened, solidified, and then the surface flexed inward. Breathing. "Every house keeps what it's shown." The whisper came from both sides of the wall at once, her own voice answering itself. The air pressure dropped. Papers lifted, swirling in a slow spiral. The reel-to-reel spun wildly, unspooling its tape into the air until it hung in looping ribbons that glimmered like veins. Through the flickering light, Lena saw something moving beyond the forming doorway. A flicker of blue, the small shape of a child, turning toward her. "Lucia?" she breathed before realizing she'd used the wrong name, the wrong story, crossing wires from another memory. The figure tilted its head. "You shouldn't have remembered," it said in her own voice. Avery grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Lena, whatever that is, it's not real." The door-shaped shadow shuddered, then split with a soft, cracking sound. A rush of cold air swept through the lab. carrying the faint smell of pine and soil. Hollow Creek's breath pouring back into the world. Lena stumbled, slamming the emergency light switch. The fluorescence flared back to life. The wall was smooth again. The tapes lay still. Avery's voice shook. "Did you see?" "I saw," she said, breathing hard. The technician stared, speechless. "All the recorders just erased themselves," he said. "Every file's blank." Lena looked down at her hands. Her fingertips were streaked with dirt, as if she'd been digging. She didn't remember doing that. "Let's get out of here," Avery said. They left the lab as dawn bled through the horizon. The air outside was still, the city not yet awake. Behind them, in the dim window of the forensic building, a faint reflection shimmered. Lena's silhouette, but older, thinner, smiling faintly as the tape reels began to spin again. The sound followed them out into the morning. 3 slow, deliberate knocks.